terrific. We've been going through Murad over here and myself. He is unpacking his material from 5 years of really working on the Quran, looking at the Arabic, and showing how time and again those who have translated from Arabic into English, they have made mistake after mistake after mistake, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes there is an agenda at work and you can see what the agenda is. At other times it just looks clumsy, or it just looks inept, like they are just running through and doing a very shoddy work. We've just looked at 4 examples of mistakes that were made by the translators. Now we're getting into something that's more intentional. These is what we call deception. And we're looking at 40 of these mistakes. We're starting this episode on number 34. So we have another 6 to go. I've invited Murad to introduce his material. He's been working for 5 years on this. Some of you are not gonna agree with that. That's fine. Watch, listen, see what he is saying, and then right there at the bottom, go down at the bottom. You can see in the where they have notes. You can see where you can actually put your own questions or things you want to talk about. That's the great thing about YouTube. They allow you to do that. So feel free to do that and come back and let us know what you think. Right, Murad, it's good to have you back. Let's get right into this. This is going to be now deception. Which and what are we talking about?
Well, these are intentional deception, and these are mistakes that are intentionally crafted to fool the English-speaking audience, and this is something that an English speaker shouldn't really forgive the translator for doing, for intentionally deceiving him this way. And now I will share my screen. So now we are moving on to deception. And these are instances where the translators clearly deceive the English speakers, um, just lying for Allah, basically. That's what's going on. We will move to this example, and it's about the word noor. What does the word noor actually mean? Well, in Arabic, we know that noor is light, and only light. But here it says, وَجَعَلَ الْقَمَرَ فِيهِنَّ نُورًا وَجَعَلَ الشَّمْسَ سِرَاجًا. So Noor here, it's saying that the moon is a light, but of course the translators, they have it as reflected light. Noor only means light in Arabic, but why do they do that? Because they want to follow modern day science, which says that the moon actually reflects sunlight. Who says that they are being dishonest here? They themselves. Let's look at another example. Here it says, Allahu nur samawati wal ard. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. They would not dare say that Allah is a reflected light for the heavens and the earth. So this was number 34, and I'll ask you, what do you think of this one?
Wow, this is really deceptive because I've had discussions with Muslims about this very thing. One of their favorite scientific proofs of the Quran is chapter 71, verse 16, and saying we only know now with telescopes and in modern science that the light that we're seeing in the moon is a reflection that's bouncing off the moon, and that's why we see it now. They didn't know that in the 7th century. There's no way that Muhammad, who is an ignorant man who could not even read and write, how could he have known about something that important? Obviously, this had to come from God himself. And that's one of their favorite verses, chapter 71, verse 16, when in reality, Nur is not reflected light, as they have shown in chapter 24, verse 35. There they get it correct because God cannot be a reflected light. Allah cannot be a reflected light. They get it correct there. They're deceiving us in chapter 71, verse 16. So, those of you, whenever you hear Muslims bring this up as a scientific proof, hammer them and say, no, that's not reflected light. That is what translators today are saying to try to get a scientific proof within the Quran.
Yeah, and another comment I want to add. My good friend Lloyd DeYoung, he made a very powerful presentation about the word Noor and the word Siraj. And he came to the conclusion that Noor actually means moonlight exclusively. So this word is always mentioned with the moon. And I understand this because the Quran is a flat earth book. And in the flat earth theory, you have that the moon and the sun each emit their own light. The moon is feminine and it has its blue light, and the sun is masculine and it has this um yellow light. And this is what's in the Quran. So when you say that the moon is a reflected light, then you are clearly being deceptive to the English speakers.
Yeah. And to the Arab, obviously the Arabic is not saying anything of the same. That's fascinating. So on both counts, this is deceitful.
Yeah, exactly. Now we will move to something very basic. It's the word kana. Kana is verb to be, but in the past, meaning it was. Kana means was. Now it says ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم. Muhammad was not the father of any of your men. But of course, always you will have it in the English translations as Muhammad is not the father of any of your men. This is to imply that Muhammad is alive, when in reality the Quran is speaking about something in the past. And of course, I have done with you before a presentation that maybe the four mentions of Muhammad in the Quran actually refer to the praised one who is Jesus Christ himself. So here the Quran is saying Muhammad was not the father of any of your men. But this is Arabic 101, but also Quran translation and deception 101 is always turning was into is. This is something all over the English translations. They never care if can is was. Now, if you see here, it says درجات منه ومغفرة ورحمة وكان الله غفورا رحيما. So Allah was all forgiving, most merciful. But of course, as you see here, this is deception. Allah is. Always you will have it as Allah is, when in the Arabic, if you ask anyone who just knows any Arabic, it says Allah was, meaning Allah was at that certain instant. He was forgiving and merciful. You should have it as Allah was. And I will ask you, what do you think of this one?
Well, especially the second one is a much more damaging one. Chapter 33, verse 40 is damaging enough because that's just the wrong translation. It is not a good translation. It's putting it, which is always in the past tense, putting into the present so that it's applied. But look at this one here in chapter 4, verse 96. By taking Allah as the all forgiving, that means he continues to be forgiving even today. That's what they want you to believe, when in reality, the chapter is very clear, the verse is very clear. This is a past tense. This is something that happened at that time, and that he is forgiving and merciful, that he is the oft forgiving one. That is not something he is today. That's happened in the past. But they've got to make it present. They don't even look at the grammar. That is deceit at its very worst, because that's a theological deceit as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is this is all over the English Qurans. I think only Osama Dakduk with the generous Quran, his translation, he is the only one who has it as Allah was all over. So I salute him for that. But any English translation, they just discard this and anything will be is. This is the problem.
Because Allah cannot change. He has to remain oft forgiving for everybody at all times, for all people, even today. That's why they've had to impose it there. Terrific stuff.
Yeah. Next example is something that I think most English speakers they know about it by now, and it's about the word ضرب.
Hmm.
So here it says وَهْجُرُهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ. Of course, every translation says strike them lightly or beat them lightly. Now, the Quran says and beat them. It doesn't say lightly in the Arabic. Adding the word lightly is a way to hide Islam's violent face towards women from the West. It is based on a hadith that the Prophet said, hit your wife with a toothbrush, which is actually funny. Uh, hit someone with a toothbrush? This is something that no one can wrap his brain around of how absurd it is. Now let's see here, because this guy, Mustafa Khattab, the Clear Quran, takes it a step further. Look at what he says here. Discipline them gently. So three words that are deceptive. It doesn't say discipline, it says beat, and it doesn't say gently. That's he added this. So he takes it a step further into translation dishonesty. This is the clear Quran that a lot of Muslim converts love. Now I will show that these Quran translators, they actually shot themselves in the foot. And now we will see why this word only means beat or strike. Here it's talking, God is to, or Allah is talking to Moses. وإذ استسقى موسى لقومه فقلنا اضرب بعصاك الحجر. Moses, strike the rock. Of course, you're not gonna strike the rock lightly. You're not gonna discipline it gently, and you're not gonna hit it with a toothbrush. So here they come back to their senses and they know that idrib means strike. And I ask you, what do you think of this one?
Oh, now, Murad, this one has personal history for me because I did a debate on this with Adnan Rashid. I don't know if you know Adnan Rashid. He's a very well-known Muslim dawagandist. He's all over the internet. But back in my when I used to be in London, we did a debate on this very thing, and he brought up that this is nothing more than to beat lightly, daraba. And in fact, he called it the is it biswak or miswak, the thing you
Miswak, yeah.
he said that's all it is. This is talking about your your toothpick, those little pieces of sticks that we clean your teeth with in the morning around the Arab world. He said that's all you're supposed to beat her with, and then he pulled one out to show us all, and it was only about this big. And, and I remember I had no even at that time I knew exactly because it's in parentheses. Whenever you see it's in parentheses, that's called commentary. So they've had to add to that to be politically correct because you cannot have a verse in the 21st century which is telling men that they are protectors of women, but to those women who disobey them, first admonish them. If that doesn't work, then throw them from the bed. If that doesn't work, hit them with little beeswax, these little miswax, these little flosses, these little sticks that you use to clean your teeth. They're not going to pay much attention. And I remember when I did a debate. Um, what is his name? He's a Palestinian, very well-known Palestinian. I did a debate in Cambridge University with him. His name will come to me. But he and I were doing a debate in about 400 people, and this verse came up, chapter 4, verse 34. And so the questioner says, "What are you supposed to do?" And it says there to beat your wives. And he says, "Listen. This is the third of three. You start with this one, you admonish her. If that doesn't work, then you throw her from the bed. And only at the end do you beat her." But at least he was being honest because then he said, "And besides, I know many women that love to be beaten." And by that time, there was a gasp in the audience. You don't say something like that at Cambridge University. Now, whenever you're at the Cambridge Union, and you do a debate, you have two doors that everybody has to go out with: the opposition and the proposition, for and against. And I was arguing for the proposition that Islam is not relevant for the 20th century, 21st century. And I had about 400 people went out my door, and only about eight went out his door. And the reason was because of this verse, because I put out and I said, do you notice that even in the translations, they have to put lightly in there when that is not what daraba means? Daraba does not mean light. It means strike, as Moses struck the rock. You don't hit it with a toothbrush. That's not going to do much to the rock. And the same way you do that with women. Because of that, you can see why Muslims are what do you do? How do you deal with this? Well, the translators, that what they did is they just added a the word lightly as if or discipline gently so to get around this so they don't have to answer this question. But it's obvious a deceit. This is huge deceit.
Yeah, and I think most Muslims in the West also know that this is deceptive and they try to use different tactics now. Like people like Andrew Tate, he now says, yes, that's the Islamic way, you should beat women. They are choosing either that they be really Islamic or that they leave Islam. But using this old tactic of beat them lightly with a miswak, it's old now. Not a lot of people are using it because it's really absurd.
It's been out there. It's been in the press because we have got it out there so much now that now most people are aware of that. But still, we need to bring it up just to let people know. Listen, we're about halfway through these very deceitful tactics, very deceitful translations. Obviously, they're trying to get away from this. The idea of that noor means reflected light. It doesn't mean reflected light, but you need to have that there in order to really give punch and authority to this scientific proof that's in the Quran. The idea that kana all the way has always meant was, but they have to have is, so that Allah is oft forgiving. He's still forgiving today, and He's still merciful and forgiving even today. Even though it's very clear that in the Arabic that was for the past tense, that was for then. And then, of course, the daraba, which is the most famous one, that's well known all over the world. Chapter 4, verse 34. It's very clear that daraba means to scourge, to what you beat with your donkey, and what Moses needed in chapter 2, verse 60, to beat the rock so that water would come out of it. That is what daraba really is. And that's what you're to do to your wives. Obviously, this is hugely embarrassing for Muslims because a 7th century environment, it probably did make sense in an Arab environment, but not today, not in the 21st century. So you've got to deceitfully change the text. Well, we're going to continue with some more of these. So we're going to come back and start with number 37 and do 3 more before we hit a real bad one, which is number 40. But let's go. Before we do, I want to thank you again, Murad, for coming on board. This is Murad, thousands of miles away. NJ, over and out.